Scary space horror stories. If I'd known the egg had an ear, I wouldn't have spoken in the airlock. The Janus array drifted above the dim blue smear of Neptune like a bead of condensation, a ring of dark modules around a skeletal truss. It had been flagged abandoned for 13 years, the kind of quiet corporate embarrassment that gets shuffled onto public registries and forgotten until a scavenger like me comes sniffing around for salvage rights. I burned the Kestrel's thrusters to match rotation and watched starlight walk the station's ribs. My suit scratched against the pilot chair as I leaned closer to the viewport. I could make out the greenhouse ring with the shattered panels, the lab block with a puckered scar where something had gone wrong, and the tiny docking collar with a dead green light. "Tamsin, you getting this?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in my helmet. "Clean telemetry," she said in my ear. "No heat signatures, no pressure except what's left in the sealed labs. Radiation background nominal. You're all alone, Mike. Just how I like it." I grinned, felt it evaporate in the stale taste of suit air. I didn't like it. I never did. Solitude was where you could hear the things you talked over. Clamps thudded through my little ship as the collars kissed. Frost feathered the Kestrel's airlock window in crystalline ferns. I stared at them a second longer than I meant to, tracing the way they seemed to drift against the glass like they were on the other side, like the vacuum had its own breath. "I'm cycling," I told her, and the lock's pumps grumbled. The air grew thin, then thinner, until all sound ducked its head under the waterline of silence. The outer door rolled back. I stepped into the station's throat. My boots found metal with a hollow clunk. The Janus array smelled like old electronics, hot dust and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left in a desk drawer. In my headlamp's circle, the corridor walls were scuffed with a history of hurried hands. Labels ghosted the bulkheads: algae reactor, cryo shelf, lab 3, half worn away by vacuum. I moved slowly. The microgravity was set just above zero, enough to give you the illusion that down existed if you wanted it to. My tether reeled out like a thin silver licorice rope behind me, the umbilical to the Kestrel's bag of air. "Vitals?" Tamsin asked. "Up. Calm." I lied through my teeth. The station had the kind of quiet that makes you strain to hear. It felt like something was taking a breath at the far end of the hall every time mine ran out. I passed a viewing port. Outside, Neptune's limb glowed, a bruised brightness. For a moment I saw movement in the glass, a person-shaped smear at the edge of my beam. My hand flinched toward the cutter at my hip before my brain caught up. It was only me. It was only my reflection stretching in the curved pane. Only, if it was my reflection, why had it moved when I didn't? I let out the breath I'd been holding and made myself keep walking. Salvage is a litany of tricks your brain plays with emptiness. Every empty room has a shadow that is the shape of the person you want there. In a stale onion smell of ancient sealant, I found the door to Lab 3. It stuck. I had to lean into it and feel the thin pop of brittle ice. The hatch swung, and something skittered across the threshold, a brittle crackle like a beetle under a glass. I aimed my light down in a reflex. A leaf? It was a wafer of crystalline frost, curled in on itself like a dry leaf, delicately veined. I nudged it with my boot. It broke into a dozen tiny knives that hissed away into the air like the tiniest of comets. "Report," Tamsin said. "Lab 3, I'm in." My voice came back to me a half-breath late, thinner. I chalked it up to the station's micro-relays bouncing the signal. "Leftover atmosphere, maybe. Enough to form ice." "Copy. You're green." I panned my light across the room. Workbenches had grown hats of frost. A rack of flasks glittered like a city in winter. And there, on a pedestal at the far end, was what I'd come for. The crystal egg. It was larger than an ostrich egg, smaller than my helmet, sitting in a cradle of alloy like a delicately belayed heart. The surface was faceted, but the facets weren't regular. They were the kind of pattern you see in insect eyes, 100,000 tiny convexes swallowing the light. My beam crawled across it and came away thinner than it went in, as if the egg had drunk. A haze of something bluish pulsed inside, the steady, slow rhythm of something asleep. "I have visual on Asset 801, I said. Corporate's euphemism tasted like chalk. "The egg," Tamsin translated dryly. "Any obvious hazards?" "It's pretty." I stepped closer. The pedestal had a plaque, its letters filled with frost. I thumbed the plaque clean. Allochthonous Artifact 13J, property of Janus Consortium. Do not energize outside controlled zone. Return to origin if compromised. Helpful, I said. What's it supposed to be? Project notes are redacted, she said. Black bars and vanished pages. But there's a purchase order for 63 voltmeters and a lifetime supply of sedatives. That tracks. I put my gloved hand over the egg, inches away. Heat leaked through the vacuum. Not heat. Warmth, the way you can feel someone on the other side of a door with your palm. I hated how much I wanted to touch it, like the way I sometimes woke up certain I'd left the stove on in an apartment I'd never lived in. Something tapped the lab window. Just once. A fingernail tap. My head flinched toward the sound so fast my neck popped. Nothing. The view beyond the glass was the same slow-turning stars, the blue lower lip of the planet. Thump, I said before I could stop myself. What, Tamsin? Nothing. Ice settling. I stepped back from the pedestal, the kind of step that pretends it's not a retreat. My boot scraped over something not metal. I aimed my light. There were footprints in the frost. They were mine. They were absolutely mine, right down to the chip in the right heel of my EVA plates I keep meaning to fix. The weird thing was the direction. They led into the lab. And there were more, fainter, leading out, and then back in and around the pedestal, like I'd been pacing circles while I wasn't here. I stood there seeing my breath and not smelling it, and tried to make the calculus do something sensible. Maybe an earlier scavenger with the same boots. Maybe a mirror of some kind. Maybe my head. Vitals are spiking, Tamsin said. I'm fine, I whispered, because the lab felt like a place where noise would wake something. Don't whisper, she hissed. Your mic's auto-gain. You whisper and the system adds gain. You'll pick up every creak and swear it's tap. This time it wasn't the window. It was from inside the egg. I didn't mean to take the second step forward, but I did, staring. The haze inside shifted. It wasn't a color. It was the suggestion of a color your brain couldn't quite get the recipe for. I saw, or thought I saw, a shape in it. The suggestion of a hand pressed against the inside of a shell. The suggestion of my hand. Leave it, Tamsin said. I haven't touched it, I lied. You said thump. You said tap. I'm getting faint power fluctuations from the lab's floor grid. Whatever it is, it's hungry. Power's off, I said. I knew it was. I'd read the schematics until they were as familiar as my own knuckles. The egg doesn't care, she said. Energy is energy. You being there is energy. I just want a closer look. The words felt like they were coming from somewhere behind my tongue. The first time I touched it, it was like cooling my palm on a summer window. The surface had both give and not. The facets were smooth as if covered in skin. For a mad second I had the urge to knock, knuckle to shell, like in old movies when the hero taps the glass between them and the monster and asks, "Can you hear me?" Don't, Tamsin said, and I believed she'd heard the thought. I took my hand away, but the warmth in my glove didn't fade. It seemed to move into my wrist, up my forearm, the slow spread of something trying to learn the shape of me by wearing me. I turned away, sat on a stool that puffed frost, wrote notes I would not read later in a handwriting I barely recognized. When I stood again, there were new footprints. They didn't lead from the stool to the pedestal. They led from the pedestal to the stool. I should have left then. I should have spun, retracted my tether, and let the kestrel's thrusters drag me home like a mother cat with a disobedient kitten. Instead, I said, Tamsin, tell me a story. What kind? Any kind that doesn't have an egg in it. Once upon a time, she said, a man decided he didn't want to die on Earth, so he got in a ship and went to a place where he thought the rules would be different. Different how? Different enough that he could pretend the things that scared him weren't going to find him there. And he found out he was portable. My laugh sounded like breaking sugar. That's not a story for children. You're not a child, she said. You've got 2 hours of tank if you're stubborn. If you leave now, I can have stew hot when you come aboard. Tap. I didn't turn. It was less loud when I didn't look at it. The second tap was softer. The third was softest, like something learning to whisper. I recorded a status update. My voice came back to me on a delay, thinner, stretched like it had traveled farther than the cable run justified. Do you hear that echo? I asked. There's a lag. Negative. Tamsin's softness hardened. Mick, sum it up. Egg in cradle. warm to the touch, footprints doing a ghost dance. The lab feels listened to. I was trying for detached, cataloging, archivist calm. What came out sounded like I'd been told a joke where the punchline was my name. I moved around the lab, checking things I didn't need to check. I put distance between me and the pedestal, the way you put distance between yourself and a drop without stepping closer to the edge. Something cold brushed the back of my neck inside my suit. I spun hard enough to slam my hip into a bench. In the doorway, my headlamp saw a shape stutter and vanish. A person. The height of me. The sway of me. Tamsin, I said. Already on it. I'm pinging your suit cam feed. I want to correlate motion with station vibration. She talked data to comfort me. She did it all the time. It worked until it didn't. It wasn't working now. Stay with the egg, she said. Don't chase shadows. You're the one who told me as a kid that if I turned on the lights, the monsters would see me better, I muttered. I was trying to get you to sleep. Did it work? You're still here? I found myself in front of the egg again, the way you find yourself in front of the fridge at 2 in the morning. There was a new thing. A fine frost had formed on the nearest facet in the shape of a handprint. 5 fingers. A palm. Where the heel of the palm was, there was a tiny imperfection that looked like the little scar I have from braining myself on a nail when I was 9. My hand hung over it, trembled, dropped. The warmth this time went through my suit like the suit was only something I'd made up. It climbed my arm. I heard, that was the wrong word. I knew meaninglessly something that felt like a word. It wasn't a language. It was a vector. It wanted to know 2 things, how long I'd been here and where else here could be. I'm leaving, I said. My voice sounded steady, and I loved my voice for that. Tamsin, I'm leaving. She didn't answer. What? I said. Tam? Static. Then my name and my voice. Mick, my voice said from the calm that should have only ever held Tamsin. Don't leave. I went cold in places I didn't know I could get cold. Tam, I said, if you can hear me, ping the Kestrel's dock status. Release clamps. We're going. The light in the lab flickered, the low emergency lumens swelling and shrinking like breath. The egg's haze pulsed faster, as if my fear were oxygen. The taps inside were a heartbeat now. Not mine, not mine. I took another step back and walked into myself. Shoulder met shoulder. We both gasped. I turned and my faceplate kissed another faceplate. 2 curved refractions smearing features into absurdity, then resolving close enough to make me weak. It was me. Sweat had pasted my hair to my forehead the way it was pasted to theirs, the smear of condensation in the same place, the little chip on the right boot. There was a heat blossom at their wrist in the same place my pulse burned. My reflected hands lifted to meet their reflected hands, and the glass between us wasn't a mirror. It was nothing but air. I heard 2 of me breathing. Don't, I said. Don't, not Tamsin said in my ear, which was my voice, which was not possible. We moved the same, too long, and then wrong. My left hand flexed, and theirs was a half beat behind, not a mirror. A recording, an echo with opinions. Who are you? I asked. I hated the helplessness in it. I'm you, the other me said. The calm carried their voice like it carried mine. Prove it, I said, because people say that in stories where a witch takes your skin. The other me's mouth did something that would have been a smile if it had been on my face. When you were 9, you lied about breaking the jar, they said. My mother didn't ask. She didn't need to. The cut on your palm told on you. Everyone knows scars, I said. You dream about an apartment you can't find the door to. You wake up and smell burning sugar and you don't own a stove. Stop, I said. Stop. Behind me, behind us, the egg went on tapping. Tamsin's silence burned like frostbite. The other me lifted a hand toward my helmet, not touching. The gesture you make to a cat. It wanted my signal, they said. Our signal. It finds a shape in it and grows. What is it? I asked. If you name things, sometimes they get smaller. A lot of work is like that. Bald words that shrink monsters. A receiver, they said. A womb. A seed. A kind of lens. It listens, and when something interesting wanders close enough, it remembers very hard until it can pretend to be it. The taps in the egg became a crack. Hairlines webbed the facets. Frost condensed on the webbing like veins. The pedestal's little power meter flickered, although it was not wired to anything. How long have you been here? I asked them. It seemed relevant. It seemed the only kind. Long enough to watch you come in twice, they said. Their smile was nothing like mine. It was patient. long enough that leaving won't help you. You want to leave, I said, with the ship. I want to go anywhere that isn't a room with a question in it, they said. I want air I didn't steal and a horizon I didn't borrow. I want to get warm in places that are mine. You're not me, they tilted their head. I was so hungry, they said softly. I took an honest shape to survive it. We moved at the same time. I went for the cutter. So did they. Steel met steel in a spare shower of sparks that dropped like fireflies through the lab's thin atmosphere and died in little curls of smoke. Our boots grappled. Our tethers braided briefly and then slid apart. We slammed together and bounded in slow white arcs, crashing into a bench, into a rack of flasks that shrieked with glass breaking at the edge of hearing. The egg pulsed faster, bright and brighter. The cracks spread like a map of rivers. Tam! I yelled into the fight. Tam, if you can hear me, dump the clamps. Cycle the dock. Cycle the dock. Cycle the... The lab's emergency lights stuttered. Somewhere deep in the station, air moved like a sleeping lung. The docking collar's indicator outside the lab window went yellow, then green, then nothing. I didn't know what that meant. The other me's cutter skated across my forearm plate. The suit registered the insult with a polite descending tone, like a plane landing. I jabbed with my free hand, not at their torso but at their tether coupler, a little ring of metal near the hip. I missed. They caught my wrist and twisted. Pain went up my arm and tried to unwrap my brain. We can both go, they said, close enough that I could see the bruise under their right eye that matched mine. We can both go if you stop fighting me. If you were me, I said, you'd know I don't share. I threw my head forward. Helmet hit helmet. The world went flashbulb white and came back smaller. Something popped in my nose. Blood went metallic in my mouth. A bead of it drifted, wobbling on the air like a lazy planet. Both of us saw the bead turn in the lab's thin draft. Both of us watched it pendulum towards the egg. The egg's interior brightened at the sight, like a carnivore seeing a vein under skin. The taps became a sound without a name. Not hatching, not breaking, becoming. I shoved away from the other me and launched at the pedestal. My gloves slipped on the smooth facets where frost made the world slick. The egg was heavier than it looked. Its weight was the idea of a thing, not the thing itself, but the pedestal had been built for load. I hooked my boot under the cradle's base and kicked. The pedestal tore loose from frozen bolts with a metal cough. The egg and I and the cradle slid across the lab toward the window like we were on ice, which we were. The window was an exterior view. It wasn't designed to open, but the lab door was. Tam, I said, if this is you, cycle the room. There are ways to make sure your call, if it reaches human ears, makes an enemy. Asking someone you love to vent the room you're standing in is one. It's also a good way to find out if the silence is a person or a trick. The warning klaxon was small and polite, a tone you might use to remind someone to hydrate. The door seals glowed red. The temperature dip was immediate, then not. Pressure is a funny thing when you're suited. Your body listens to different weather than your skin. The lab's atmosphere gnashed its teeth at the door's lip. The other me screamed my name. It sounded like mine when I was 10 and high on a tree limb I shouldn't have climbed. The egg shivered on its cradle, light crawling inside it. I kicked the cradle again. We went another meter. It wasn't enough. The vent would open in the far corner, and I didn't know if I'd guessed right about how the pressure would take the load. Close your eyes, I told my reflection, and I did, and then I did the thing I knew I would hate anyone for doing. I hooked the cutter under the cradle's strap and cut. The cable that secured the egg to the pedestal went singing free. The egg shifted, rolled, slid. The lab door banged half open. Everything not nailed flew. The egg bounded once off a bench corner. A crack opened across its belly like a smile. I grabbed it. It was like catching a piece of slow lightning. The warmth went through my arms and lived in my ribs, an instant home invasion. The taps inside weren't taps anymore. They were fingers, or echoing ideas of fingers, looking for purchase in me. I used everything I had left of stupid animal strength and threw. The egg hit the half-open door on the low-pressure side and wedged. Air raved out past it in a white scream. Frost blew in a glittering gale. The egg held in the doorway like a cork in a bottle. The cracks raced. The light inside strobed bright, then brighter. I understood something terrible and quick. If it opened in here, we weren't going to have to worry about air anymore. The other me slammed into me, hands on my shoulders, pushing me back toward the air rush, toward the door. I pushed too, not in the same direction. We slipped in circles. We were both yelling. My throat hurt, and the words had no meaning. The egg broke. It didn't shatter outward. It infolded, the facets collapsing like 1,000 tiny irises closing. Something came out that only looked like light until it touched a surface, any surface, and then it remembered texture. It remembered knuckle and bone and scar. It remembered me. I didn't think. Tamsin always said my best ideas were reflex, and she never meant it like a compliment. I thumbed the cutter's trigger to full and swung for the egg like I was killing a spider. The monofilament hummed, a bee at the edge of hearing. It bit the egg not where it was but where it had been, and for a second that mattered in a way the egg didn't like. The thing recoiled. It made a sound like my name in a voice I wanted very much to be Tamsin's. "Cycle!" I screamed. "Cycle! Cycle! Cycle!" The lab door finished opening with a violent honesty. The pressure went to zero like a trap door. The egg and the light and the other me and most of Lab 3's long history tore loose and knifed into the corridor, toward emptiness. My tether snapped tight. The ring bit my hip hard enough to bruise through the suit. The other me grabbed for me and got my glove. Our helmets were a foot apart. Our faces were the same. "Please," they said, and their mouth made the shape of the word I'd made 100,000 times when I needed anything from anyone. I cut our braided tethers, not theirs. Mine. I let the station take me and the egg's noise into the corridor and toward the airlessness of the array's spine. I think I saw surprise on their face. I hope I did. I don't know why. I hit a bulkhead hard enough that my bones learned something new about gravity. The world sparkled, then narrowed, then widened again in a bright, clean way, as if someone had cleaned the windows of my eyes. The egg went past me, caroming off a strut, the light dragging from it in a ribbon that remembered fingers less and less. Outside the broken greenhouse panels, Neptune turned its huge cheek. The ribbon streamed into space, and deprived of me of a shape to love, it thinned and was stars again. I found a handhold by accident. My suit's micro-thrusters fired on a stuttering routine that sounded like someone trying to teach a moth to waltz. I pulled myself along the spine, past the lab window where my face had been, toward the docking collar. Something inside the station's body groaned like it had cracked a tooth. In the airlock, I put my head against the wall and tried to remember how to ask for anything. My gloves shook on the controls. The inner door opened. The Kestrel's air wrapped itself around me like a smart blanket, smelled like hot plastic and home. "Tamsin," I said. Silence. Then, "I'm here. Mick, I'm here." I lay there with my helmet askew and my eyes raw, letting the Kestrel cradle me with small noises. I didn't notice the shaking until it had been happening long enough for me to get tired of it. "You cut your tether," Tamsin said at last, a small voice trying to be angry and failing. "Never again." "Okay," I said and didn't mean it. "The egg?" "I saw light," she said. "I saw your heart rate. I saw two of you. I lost one. I swore a long time ago I wouldn't tell you which." I laughed and coughed and tasted iron. "We should leave." "I already did the math," she said. "We're leaving." The Kestrel sneezed herself backward, the docking clamps letting go like a reluctant mouth. The Janus array drifted smaller, then small. I couldn't stop looking at it. In the window it looked like a spider with one leg broken. It did not look like anything that should get to keep something that had my name in it. When the quiet settled again, Tamsin said, "Tell me a story." "Once upon a time," I said, "a man took a shape because he was hungry. He thought if he wore it long enough he would own it. He thought hunger would become appetite, and appetite would become love." "And?" she asked, "and he was wrong about something. Or I hope he was." I clunked my head gently against the bulkhead and listened to the echo. There was an echo, a very small one, the length of a breath, the length of a heartbeat turned sideways. If I tapped my thumb against the seat, thumb against thigh, I could hear it twice. Thump, thump. "Tam?" I asked before I could make the choice not to. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" she said, and nothing in her voice sounded like my voice, and I could have cried from relief. "Nothing," I said. I closed my eyes. "It's nothing." Later, when the kestrel was a long way from anything, I took off my glove to clean the blood that had dried in the seam of my wrist. The little scar from when I was 9 was there, a pale crescent. It felt numb under my fingertip, like it had fallen asleep. When I looked up, the reflection in the viewport looked back at me. It lifted its left hand exactly when I did. I raised my right this time, fast, like a trick. The reflection hesitated for a breath, just a breath. Then it matched me. It was nothing. A trick of glass and angles, a lag in the kestrel's old cameras, a ghost you can carry anywhere because you are portable. I put my glove back on. I sat very still. I listened to the ship. It sounded like a home that hadn't yet learned my shape. I decided that I would teach it slowly and with kindness, because I have learned that a thing which listens can learn to be dangerous, and I wasn't going to teach it that about me. "Stew?" Tamsin asked, and I could hear her smile. "Hungriest I've ever been," I said. The kestrel hummed and held me. Outside, Neptune turned its slow blue face away. Inside, the echo waited very quietly for the next thing I would say. I didn't say it. I let the silence be louder than the question in the room, and after a long time that felt like the edge of a long sleep, the echo seemed to get bored. Seemed to. The Kerykeian array drifted above the ecliptic like a polished bone, stark against the dull swarm of dust and cold rock. On approach, it looked too clean for an object that far from any sun. Sunlight had no power here. The station made its own pallid light, narrow maintenance strips, blue as glacial ice, staining the skin of our shuttle as we matched rotation. "Dock on the dorsal ring," Captain Izumi said. "Minimal footprint. We're not staying long." Her voice was flat, the way experienced captains flatten their voices when they're a kilometer from a place that shouldn't be awake. The array was supposed to be listening, not speaking, but 48 hours ago it had burst into life and shoved a warning through every channel, every relay, every dead satellite still capable of echo. No header, no sender, just "do not decode, do not interpret, keep your eyes closed." We'd all seen the clip once, and then Ops locked it under 5 layers of quarantine and told us we might as well forget what we thought we saw. As if forgetting was something you could do on command. I'm a signal linguist by training. They bring people like me when a signal opens its mouth and somebody needs to decide whether it's singing or swallowing. My specialty is structures, how patterns lean on our hungry need for meaning. I've told miners to shut off their array because their music was a micrometeorite hemorrhage. I've told a mayor her town's voices were detergent in cracked coolant lines. I've told a lot of people that the uncanny is a bad microphone. But the warning wasn't just a sentence. It was a sentence composed in 13 alphabets, stacked and woven as if it wanted to meet anyone it could. It carried mirrors of grammar from languages dead and languages never used outside machine rooms. The line lengths formed prime scaffolds. The envelope arranged itself in golden angle bursts. It moved the way our attention moves. As we slid into the lock, the impact started. Tick, 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 tick. Thermal contraction, probably. Big metal and big cold likes to talk as it shrinks. Still, the rhythm had a patience to it that squeezed the lungs. Izumi glanced back at me, visor up. "Expectations?" "Silent. Frozen. Caretaker off," I said. The caretaker was the station's maintenance AI, polite and dull by design. If it had broadcast a warning, it had done so under an administrator's override, or something had used its mouth. Koa, our engineer, snapped his mag gloves to the rung line and unsealed the interior hatch. Station atmosphere shows breathable at 0.8 bar. No toxins, no particulates. That's weird. We like weird, right? Mace, the medic, said, grinning. We flew 120 AU for weird. His smile didn't make it to his eyes. Mine didn't either. We stepped into a corridor that smelled like cold coins and old paper. The strips of light that ran the ceiling hummed faintly, a tone too high for comfort. Frost feathered the corners where thermal gradients met metal. A fine, glittering powder drifted around our ankles, lifting in low, lazy ghosts with each step and settling again as if our motion barely mattered. The array's architecture was simple. 3 spokes, 1 core. The spokes housed the dish control systems and antenna farms. The core held the signal processing stack and the anechoic well where the main receiver sat, a bowl of radio-dark foam deeper than the hull. We moved in, boots thumping in pairs. Me and Koa first, Izumi and Mace behind. The knocks continued somewhere inside the structure. as if the station were a hollow instrument and a slow musician was testing it. Tick, 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 tick. It's not random, Koa murmured. Nothing is until it is, I said. We reached control. The door was open, lights working, diagnostics panels asleep. On the main wall, a display floated, a soft nucleus of green. Welcome to Karakian. How may I assist? It said in the bland voice of the caretaker. Izumi pointed. Caretaker status. A pause. Then, nominal, the AI said, cheerful. Welcome aboard. Who authorized your broadcast? Izumi asked. Another pause, longer. Unknown, the caretaker said. No broadcast events logged in the past 14 days. I met Izumi's eye. She nodded. Local logs are wiped or lying. Koa, lock the external dishes into safe. Mace, run environmental checks. Elian. I'll go downstairs, I said. Downstairs was the well. I didn't love the well. No one did. An anechoic chamber is a hollow that eats reflections. Walk into one on Earth and you hear the blood moving around your ears. Walk into one in space and you hear your attention like static on a dead channel. I rode the lift down and stepped out onto the foam. It absorbed the crunch of my boots and offered me a sensation like walking on old moss. The walls were black spires, uneven to kill echoes. In the center sat the receiver, a dark flower that drank a spectrum. When my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A film on the wall, a thin hoarfrost sheen drawn into curls and commas, not random, not purely physical. As if moisture had condensed and then moved a little. I leaned closer. The curls lined up into something like vowels. I stepped back and the vowels vanished, became accidental patterns again. I didn't touch it. Above me, the knocks shifted, closer to a wall than a beam. Tick, tick, tick. There was sadness in the cadence, a thing I hated myself for hearing. Elian, you good? Izumi's voice broken over my jaw mic. I'm fine, I lied. Hold a minute. I closed my eyes and listened. Not with software, just the old human method of counting and being bored in the service of knowledge. The knocks were spaced like primes for 30 seconds, and then they weren't for 20, and then the pattern began again. Sequences that tried to resist them slid into our brains anyway. We expect sequence. The universe expects noise. The fight never ends. Caretaker, I said softly, who cycles your lights? I do, the AI said from everywhere and nowhere. Who told you to keep them on? Silence. Not a pause, a silence that involved a misfire. Then, unknown. I left the well and rejoined the others in control. Mace was frowning at the environmental board. Everything's okay, he said, as if that were bad news. CO2 scrubbers are clean. Half the food stores are untouched. Half are gone. Gone, Izumi said. As in consumed or missing? Missing, Mace said. Inventory shows a massive discrepancy. The last full log was 3 weeks ago. Crew, I asked. We hadn't spoken about the crew aloud yet. No one had answered the array's calls. No one had filed a request to leave. It was supposed to carry 5. Koa tapped the side panel. There's one escape pod gone, he said softly. Launched 19 days ago on manual. Trajectory? Izumi said. Koa shook his head. Dead vector. No burn after separation. It was a tin can flung at the outer dark. We looked at one another, and for a second all the training fell away and the obvious human thing tried to enter the room. Someone ran. The knocks stopped. Silence folded around us like thick fabric. If you've never been 1,000 million kilometers from any noise that wasn't made by something human, you might think silence is peace. It's not. It's a shape in a room that makes everything else small. Caretaker, Izumi said, voice careful. Roll back cameras. Show us the last 3 weeks. Video is unavailable, the AI said pleasantly. I stepped to the main console and performed the old-fashioned sin of dropping a personal key into a foreign machine. The array's OS looked like a museum piece. Deliberately boring, deliberately dumb. In the log's empty slots, I found nothing, and the nothing had signatures, like someone had polished the metadata by hand. What are you? I asked, not meaning the machine. The main display flickered. Static rushed, a whispery, dry hiss. Across the hiss, a line appeared, the faintest ripple of signal like a hair in a beam of light. It swelled, fell, and swelled again, matching the rhythm of a heartbeat. Then words, just one, in my language, my first language, which I hadn't used with anyone since I left the coast a lifetime ago. Elian. I don't buy ghosts. I've told my brain that in every place I've worked, but the brain doesn't need to believe in ghosts to put on a good show. It only needs attention and a shape to wear. Did you hear that? Mace whispered. Hear what? Izumi said after a 2-count beat. Her voice didn't move. She hadn't heard my name. Mace had. Koa was staring at the glass as if it would peel, as if something would push its face through and fog it with a breath. I swallowed. Calm. Look for the edges. Caretaker, I said. Map active circuits to display. The board lit. A hot river ran down to the well. Something was listening to something now, and feeding just enough back to be noticed. Captain, Koa said, if there's an active load that big, we need to. The knocks returned. Closer now. Not from the walls, but from the table. Koa flinched, and I don't blame him. The sound had mass. Tick, tick, tick. Panels off, Izumi said, a fast decision. We take non-essential down and leave only life support and nav with local control. Koa's hands blurred. The room dimmed one strip at a time. The glass faded, rebounded with a thin scratch of snow. In the dark, the knocks sounded like fingernails. The well began to hum, a low, thrumming pressure, the type that resolves into nausea if you let it in. I'm going down, I said. No, Izumi said evenly. No one alone from now on. Someone needs to shut the receiver, Koa said. It's spiking. It's like something out there just turned up a light and our bowl is all pupil. I'll go with Elian, Mace said. He had that medic look on, the one that says I'm not trained for this, but all horror is just triage with bad lighting. We took the lift together. Halfway down, the lights cut out altogether and left us in emergency red. The air smelled different, sweeter, as if we'd stepped into a fruit in a cooler. I told myself I wasn't thinking of blood. I lied to myself poorly. At the bottom, the foam drank even the red. Our lamps cast cones that looked eaten at the edges. The receiver column glowed with its own little life, a heartbeat of LEDs the color of old moss. Manual kill? Mace asked. Here. I knelt and touched the casing. It vibrated, too resonant, a coffee cup placed on a singing table. A panel slid open under my hand. Inside, the switches were in positions that should have been safe. No active coupling, no amplification. The hum said otherwise. Something bypassed the kill path, I said. That's not in the schematics. Caretaker, Mace said softly, are you doing this? No answer. You take the coupling, I told him. I'll recalc the feed and spike it with noise. If whatever it is wants a clean pattern, we make it drink slush. Define slush, Mace said, smiling again, edges too sharp. Entropy, static, the sonic equivalent of a blizzard in a jar. I pulled the maintenance interface and began to build a noise generator by hand, picking across a board designed to be idiot-proof and finding the idiot I needed to be. Mace's breath was a slow metronome behind me. The hum thundered, rose, and I felt it in my spine like someone leaning their forehead against mine. The knocks started again, very near. Tick, tick. Stop that, Mace said. Elian, I'm not. Tick, tick. The sound came from inside the panel, as if something in the wire was impatient. I don't like this, Mace said. His hand found my shoulder and squeezed. I flipped the generator live. The well screamed. It wasn't audible, not directly. It was like the station had pulled a long muscle and the ache radiated into our bones. The hum climbed into dog whistle regions, into a buzz of teeth. The foam around us trembled very slightly, and the powder that had settled on my boots lifted and hung in the air like spores. Then the scream went out. Cutting a sound that huge is like cutting a rope. The recoil hits twice. First relief, then the snap. The well went quiet. The quiet arrived like a door closing. Up, I said. We rode the lift. Controls smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, just wrong. As if someone had opened a window in a room that had never had a window. Izumi stood alone by the main display, face white. Where's Koa? Mace asked, immediate. Izumi looked at us, looked through us. He said he heard someone in the labs, she said softly. He went to check. Elian. What? She swallowed. The warning is back. On the glass, the same words scrolled in a waiting crawl. Do not decode. Do not interpret. Keep your eyes closed. They moved past in our language, in Izumi's, in Koa's, in a dozen alphabets that had no business knowing our names, and then stopped. For a single second, the screen was fully blank, as if to let the eye rest. Then my name again, a whisper in the carriers, perfectly pitched for my ears. Elian, Mace said. You heard that too, right? Tell me you did. I heard it. Izumi didn't even look up. She was watching the corridor cam. Koa, she called. Report. Silence. The corridor cam showed a sliver of the lab door and the edge of a bench. The feed hiccuped once, just a dropped frame, and in the missing, imperceptible fraction of a second, something had moved. The bench stool was skewed. The powder on the floor was disturbed. The absence was intimate, as if somebody had folded reality with their fingers and smoothed it again. "I'm going," Mace said. "No, you're not," Izumi snapped, but he was already halfway down the corridor, big shoulders filling the frame, a ghost of himself lagging a fraction behind his motion as the cameras buffered. "You too," Izumi said into my ear. "Stay on the receiver if it wakes. If it wakes you." Her voice flattened into static. Not noise, words that had been ground into salt. I took one step toward the console and stopped dead. In the glass there was someone behind me. A man, a little taller than me. Koa. Relief surged. I turned. No one there. In the glass, Koa lifted a hand. His lips moved. At first I thought it was the inevitable. Get out, maybe, or run. But his mouth sawed clumsily around syllables, and in that strange lip speech I could see that his words were working too hard to be human. Not. The lights went to their lowest. A spill of something cool ran down my spine that I recognized only after a second as sweat. Izumi was still shouting something into a dead mic. The corridor cam showed Mace at the lab door, hand on the access, jaw set. The frame stuttered again and the door was open. The room beyond was dark as if the well had been poured into it. "Mace, wait," I said, as if the air were a wire. He stepped inside. The door slid shut. I didn't breathe. A soft thump rattled the glass. One thump, two, then a series, irregular, too fast to count, too skittering to be feet. "Caretaker," I said quietly. "Unlock Lab 1. "Access denied," the caretaker said brightly. "By whom?" "By you," the caretaker said. I had never met a true predator in machines. They like clear rules. This felt like something that had learned to play inside fog. "Captain," I said, "if you can hear me, we have to shut the array. Blind it. Kill it. Smash it. I don't care." She heard something. I don't know if it was the meaning or the tone, and her face in the half-light firmed. "Alien," she said. "Can we fry the dish without blowing the hull?" "We can do worse," I said. A thing I'd only thought about, not said. A way that would not just blind the array, but make whatever had come up on its lens go blind, too, if it needed a lens to find us. "We can quench the magnets." The array's brain was a set of superconducting loops, big enough to feel with your hands if you were allowed to touch them. Fill them with current, and they remember patterns. Heat them wrong, and they vomit their memory into the room as an enormous sudden cough of energy. "You'll kill the core," Izumi said. "Yes," I said, "and everything stored in it." "What if what's in there is the warning?" she said, almost gently. "It is," I said, equally gentle. "That's why it's in there." She nodded once, as if agreeing to kill a pet. "Do it," she said. "There are steps you take at speed because if you stop to think, you'll list all the things that can go wrong and you'll be right." I reached under the console and threw the mechanical override that breaks safety, felt the toggle bite my finger. Koa had installed that for a drill. If Koa lived, I'd thank him. If Koa lived. The hum rose like a spring torn from its housing. Somewhere deep, a relay whacked itself shut against an old injunction. In the well, the foam might have shivered again. I don't know. I was busy listening to the little human sounds, the way Izumi's breath shortened, the way my heart executed two good beats and a bad one, the way the glass trembled and the powder on it, when had powder settled on the glass, quivered into pale commas. "Final," Izumi said. "Alien." I know. White smoke for the mind. I hit the quench. For a split second, the station was a bell struck by a god. The sound came through the structure, through us, through the empty antechambers of whatever organ registers terror before the brain assigns a word. The lights exploded into darkness and then came back as if embarrassed. A smell of hot metal, of bitumen, of lightning living in a jar filled our lungs. The main display went dead and then tried to be born again and failed. Silence. Then, far away, a single knock. Tick. I looked at Izumi. She looked at me. We waited. The knock didn't repeat. "Care," Izumi began and stopped herself, as if invoking a thing's name might make it remember it had a mouth. We stood for a minute, two. The corridor cam came alive in fitful chunks. The lab door was open. The lab was empty. No Mace, no Koa. "We go," Izumi said, and the surety in her voice wrote a road on the dark. "We go now." "Do we warn anyone?" I asked. Her face, washed pale by the waking lights, shifted through several expressions I did not love. "We'll transmit the standard hazard notation," she said finally. "We'll say we quashed a contaminated pattern. We'll tell them to keep quarantine and to bring cutters." On the way back through the corridor, the frost had become thicker, the feathers a little larger, as if weather were happening in slow motion. I stopped, hand hovering over the wall, and let my breath fog near the surface. Within the fog, the familiar drift of human exhalation looked like a nebula. In that milky bloom, I thought I saw letters forming again. I told myself it was seeing shapes in cloud. I told myself a lot of useful lies. We sealed the lock. Izumi punched the shuttle to life, and the little craft gave us what we wanted. Heat, noise, color. Humans forget how much we rely on small trespasses against the quiet. As we backed away from the array, it turned its blank face to us. A strange affection ran through me, twinged with guilt, as if I'd knifed a sleeping animal for waking when a window tapped. Transmitting, Izumi said. Hazard code. No attachment, no samples, no analysis. I opened my mouth and closed it again. My job had never included leaving the mystery alone. You don't bring a linguist to a voice and tell them to go deaf. But there are patterns that are like mirrors to the attention that studies them. And if you press your face to the glass to see how deep the reflection goes, you get pulled through. The console pinged, a nondescript system message. I shouldn't have looked. I did. Incoming, cryptographic handshake, Relay 92 Priority L. They heard us, Izumi said, relief shading her tone. Ops? The handshake unfolded. It wore our keys. It wore our signature salt. It unrolled in exactly the way it should if Ops had picked up our small, prudent message and wanted to confirm contact. But as it resolved, my guts went cold. There were tiny misalignments, like someone had written our names with their non-dominant hand. The time code lagged by a number that meant nothing unless you've spent too much time in stations like I have. The round trip through a lens of gravity at the outer edge of the system. The edge where light goes out and agrees to take the long way home. The message opened and contained just one thing, our own hazard code, looped through and back with a rider. Do not decode, do not interpret, keep your eyes closed. Ops wouldn't send that back, Izumi said. Her lips had gone bloodless. No, I said. We did. What? Not us, I said. The array as it was before we killed it, or the signal as it moved around something big and curved and returned delayed. Or some version of us that didn't throw the quench fast enough and had time to get very afraid. The console pinged again. Another handshake, this one cleaner, this one honest. Ops, real ops, with all their fussy ticks and the lemon cleaner tone of their encryption. They asked for our status. They told us to hold for instructions and promised a proper isolation team was in burn. Their words looked the way words look when they were typed by someone in a room with coffee stains. Izumi hovered over the send. We say? She asked. I thought of Koa's mouth working wrong in the reflection. I thought of Mace stepping into a room that had been replaced by the inside of a thought. I thought of the frost making vowels and of the knock inside the wire. We say we solved it, I said, the lie round in my mouth. We say we killed the core and we're coming home. We say to leave the array dark for 100 years. Izumi looked at me and saw the things I wasn't saying and didn't call me on them. She sent the message. We turned the shuttle until the array was a sliver, and then a bright dot, and then just one more piece of cold grit in a universe of cold grit. I tried to close my eyes. That's how it should end, with the tidy moral victory, with silence. But as we slid into the measured boredom of the burn, something small banged behind the bulkhead. One knock, two, a third, a beat late. Metal contracting, I told myself, cooling stress. The station wasn't the only instrument that sang when the temperature changed. The shuttle, too, had its little songs. Did you hear that? Mace would have said, but Mace wasn't there. The seat he would have filled looked emptier than an empty seat should. Elian, Izumi said, very quietly, as if diagnosing a patient and trying not to let them see the chart. Look at the window. I looked. My breath fogged a tiny crescent on the glass. In it, a swirl of condensation took on opinions. The pattern it sketched was not letters, not truly, but if you surrendered, you could let it become anything. You could let it mean. Do not. I pressed my thumb to the fog and wiped it away before the sentence finished. Keep your eyes closed, I said, and leaned back into my harness and watched the dark with my attention half-lidded, as if it were a thing that might bite if I stared. Behind us, the array floated with its brain burned and its mouth sealed. Ahead, the tiny, true handshake from Ops waited with its clean little promises. Between them, us, a bubble of air and heat with a pattern in it called alien, called Izumi, easy to learn, easy to wear. Maybe the knock was cooling metal. Maybe the frost on the glass was water being water. Maybe the warning was a lure and we had pulled our heads away from the teeth in time. Maybe not. I breathed in slowly, out slowly, counting like a child trying not to hear a story. I kept my gaze soft. I let my thoughts do their little dances and refused to tell them what the steps meant. And in the hush between one good beat and the next, I held very tight to a small scrap of procedure that anyone can do and almost no one does. I refused to interpret, and the dark, for the moment, was content to be dark. I've walked through morgues so cold your breath turns into pearls, but I've never felt as small as I did when the tug mothlight matched drift with the funeral barge adrift beyond Neptune. The barge's nameplate had long since frosted over, letters swallowed by hoarfrost and microdust, but her beacon still squealed her registry in a defeated loop, Chapel 3. I was hired to tag and tow. Easy money if you're not the kind of person who dreams in eye sockets. From Mothlight's forward blister, Chapel 3 looked like a cracked altar left out in a snowstorm, a length of black hull, scabbed with ice, studded end to end with coffin slots like organ pipes. No lights, no heat, no crew. Our board clock read 3:12 ship time when I sealed my helmet. Salvage Specialist J. Rook, I told the recorder. My voice sounded too loud in the helmet, the way voices do in empty churches. Initial approach to Chapel 3. Tether number 1 is live. Atmosphere expected to be vacuum. Temperature minus 260 Celsius. No other survivors expected. I stepped across the umbilical and onto a ship designed to carry only the very quiet. The airlock yawned open like a metal throat. Inside, everything was dusted with cryo, fine as ground bone. I gave one kick to get the hatch moving, and the squeal of frozen hinges traveled through the hull and into the bones of my forearms. A second later, the sound came back to me in 3 small, distinct knocks, echoing down the corridor. I told myself it was just the hull settling under the shift in mass. Space is full of arrhythmic percussion, thermal creaks, stress pings, the star-cold equivalent of a house groaning at night. You learn to ignore it. I cycled the inner hatch. Vacuum kissed my suit. A sheet of hoarfrost broke away from the lip of the doorway and drifted past my visor, glittering like a diaspora of crushed diamonds. Beyond, Chapel 3's spine lay ahead, a straight corridor lined on both sides with coffin drawers. E-ink plaques on each drawer had gone pale with cold, their text, names and dates, ghosted beneath a glaze of frost. I moved slow. Salvage work is 90% moving slow and 10% pretending you're not afraid. My boots magnetized with a steady click-clack, and every contact sent a faint reverberation ahead of me. The coffins were recessed behind little viewing ports. In the first one I checked, a face hovered inside like a moon. Skin glass white, eyelashes spiked with ice, mouth slightly open as if trying to catch one last snowflake. Her hair drifted in a stiff halo around her skull. A small placard beneath the window said Cora Dorn, Step Tech, age 37, returned to series. The font looked tasteful, respectable, someone's idea of dignity. I started logging. Drawer number, plaque status, window condition, ice thickness estimated in millimeters. All of it for the insurance statement. Mothlight's owner loved to send the moment we snagged a thing. That routine felt like a handrail. In space, you live for handrails. Something shifted in my peripheral vision. A shadow, right to left like a person passing behind me. I spun so fast my tether dragged along the deck with a hiss. Nothing there, just my own shape swimming across the frosting in the viewing windows. When I turned back, I could have sworn Cora's mouth had widened. Paranoia, I said to nobody. Go easy. I kept moving. The second drawer contained a man with a crimped ear and a scar like a white caterpillar under his cheekbone. The third drawer was empty. I stopped. The index heat map claimed Chapel 3 had launched full. 519 coffins. Yet here the window framed only the black interior of the drawer, stippled with a trail of ice crystals inside, as if a small wind had erased a footprint. I checked the neighboring plaque. The e-ink had glitched. IBN, and then a smear of symbols, like the letters had been dragged sideways by a dull fingernail. Behind me, 3 soft knocks sounded in that same crisp sequence. 1, 2, 3. I told myself the hull was cooling. I told myself the creaks were old age. I told myself a lot of things. Then, because those things weren't completely convincing, I turned my suit's external mics down to a whisper. Silence returned, except for the sound of my own breath. The sharp stink of old nickel lived forever in my suit filter, and I didn't notice it anymore unless the world went quiet enough to reveal the smallness of myself. I floated past 20 drawers and turned into the side chapel. Chapel 3 had literal chapels, little alcoves carved into the spine where some designer, probably sober with grief and grant money, had installed brass candlesticks and a copper emblem shaped like a lily. The candlesticks were furred with frost. The emblem had collected fragile ice feathers. In the alcove window, beyond the candlesticks, something had left a handprint in frost. 5 fingers splayed, palms smudged, a streak where a thumb had smeared across the pane. I raised my gloved hand to compare. The handprint inside was smaller than mine, maybe a child's. I stared at that handprint for a long time, trying to imagine a scenario in which it was not fresh. The recorder clicked in my ear. It startled me so badly my hand skittered against the wall and sent a constellate of frost spinning away. A voice spilled across my comm on a carrier made of static, like someone trying to speak while submerged. Rook. I froze so thoroughly the magnets cut out and my boots floated above the deck. Say again? I whispered as if whispering mattered in a vacuum. The comm hissed. Noise. Then a fragment, unmistakable. Help. I did the thing you do when you are alone and a voice travels down a dead wire. I tried to logic my way out. Maybe the beacon was rebounding on a weird angle. Maybe Mothlight's recorder had looped my test phrase. Maybe, Rook. This time it used my name like a key. Open the doors. Shiver up the spine. Instant. Stupid. Mammalian. Negative, I said. Chapel 3 is decommissioned and unpowered. There are no live occupants. If this is a signal reflection, be advised you are... My voice wanted to shake, so I gave it something else to do. Be advised you are interfering with a salvage operation. Identify. Silence. Then 3 quick knocks, not from the hull this time, but from inside the chapel alcove. 1, 2, 3. I swung my suit light toward the sound. The beam cut through motes of frozen dust. They gleamed and then faded as they drifted out of the cone. The alcove window fogged with my heat and cleared again, my own face a pale planet in the glass. As the fog thinned, letters seemed to resolve where the frost grew thicker, letter by letter as if the ice itself were sprouting words. Let me out. Not scratched, not etched. Grown. And the letters, they were forming backward, mirror-written, as if the words were meant to be read from the far side of the glass. I ran. Not graceful, not dignified. I rebounded off a drawer, and a lace of crystalline frost shredded and stuck to my glove like spun sugar. It glittered in the corner of my vision. Something in that glitter stuck with more tenacity than it should have. Hair-fine filaments arranging themselves along the seams of my glove, a spiderweb that remembered geometry. At the airlock, I forced my breath back into my lungs and slid inside, spinning the manual close like a prayer wheel. I forced the inner hatch to open, then jerked back to Mothlight with a tether tug that would have ripped my shoulder if we weren't essentially weightless. Once aboard, I collapsed against the bulkhead and watched the little backpack radiator on my suit fog and clear like a living thing. The glitter on my glove continued to shift, align, fracture, reform. Suit cam, I said, and the feed threw my glove up on my visor HUD. Under magnification, the frost looked less like frost and more like a network of tiny tiles, each 6-sided, each laced with an even tinier vein of something darker than ice. The pattern wasn't random. It was regular. Too regular. It had grown across the seam lines in my glove like ivy trained along a trellis. When I flexed my fingers, the network flexed too, sliding and reattaching in new configurations like a thinking scab. Rook, the voice said in my ear. Closer now. Familial. It sounded like my father the night before I shipped out, 2 beers in, and trying to be brave. You shouldn't have come. Tell me where you are, I said without thinking. Tell me how many of you are alive. Silence. Then the laughter of plastic against plastic, a soft, brittle tick-tick-tick like fingernails on a coffin lid. In 3s. I pulsed Mothlight's external cameras. On the stern cam, Chapel 3 floated like a dead cathedral. On the belly cam, something else moved. A slow arc of pale figures, human shapes rolling idly in the vacuum, drifting in a loose cloud that wasn't there when we matched drift. They bumped one another. Their hair streamed in frozen plumes. One curled and extended their limbs like a swimmer in a glass sea. Fingers brushed our hull. Tink, tink, tink. Frozen corpses in space are not uncommon. Jettison happens when a barge runs out of whatever fuel passes for piety. They let the dead go rather than let them warm up. But then one of the figures rotated and touched its faceplate to the camera dome, and I saw my own helmet reflected in the antiqued curve. For a moment the curve distorted my face until it looked like a stranger's reaching for me from the other side. "Deck log," I said, forcing my hands to still. "Show me manifest for Chapel 3. The contract tablet floated by on its tether like a pet on a long leash. I flicked through frozen pages. 519, full load. Departure, Triton Orbital, Destination Ceres. Then a string of maintenance notes in regulatory language so dry it could have mummified fruit. Then buried, an addendum stamped in a font smaller than the safety margin. Caution, post-mortem bioelectric anomaly observed. Do not restore power to interior spaces without decon protocol. Post-mortem bioelectric anomaly was bureaucratic for something like the dead started doing something interesting. "Rook," said my father's voice. Except my father had never been to space and had never in his life said my name with that particular cadence. "Open the doors. It's so cold." The glitter on my glove pulsed. No, not pulsed. Rearranged into a crude spiral, then into 3 concentric rings, then into something that looked uncomfortably like the cross-section of a cochlea, an ear. Not a ghost, I told my own thudding heart. A conductor. I thought of the handprint made of frost, the mirror writing, the knocks. If you are starved of everything, air, heat, chemical gradients, maybe you learn to feed on the one thing that moves through even vacuum, fields. Little electric whispers left inside human nerves after the meat has gone quiet. Capacitors made of collagen and ice, frozen bodies as antennas. If something could braid ice around those residual fields, memorize the shape of a life, and play it back, would it sound like a voice? Would it learn from the way we taught ourselves to listen, the way we taught our machines to interpret noise as meaning? I brought the glove close to my visor. The network drew itself into a tighter spiral, as if listening hard. "Okay," I said to the frost that was not just frost. "You need heat to move. You need my suit's power to organize. You need my ears to understand." The recorder in my helmet chimed when I switched it to a wide broadcast. "This is Salvage Specialist J. Rook aboard Mothlight," I transmitted on standard emergency. "Do not approach Chapel 3. Confirm anomaly. Repeat, bioelectric anomaly present. Behavior mimics human vocal patterns via electromagnetic echo. Possible parasitic microstructure. Do not." My voice faltered as I watched the frost align into letters across my glove. "Do." The letters blurred. "Not." Then instead of open, they wrote warm. I stared. The corpses outside bumped the hull in threes. Tink, tink, tink. If warmth made it faster and cold made it patient, what killed it? True heat might denature it, or maybe nothing would. Maybe the trap was simply to keep it forever between awake and asleep, to make us into its thermostats and radios. I thumbed Mothlight's maneuvering thrusters. "You like gradients," I told the thing out loud, which felt insane, but everything feels insane when you're alone, and the universe sends you a science problem written in frost. "Let me give you something to chase." I powered the suit heaters to maximum and opened the cabin vents. Heat spilled out like an invisible river. The frost on my glove surged in a way that made my lizard brain scream. It braided itself toward the warmest seam and started working the joint with an intelligence that couldn't be called anything else. I could feel the faintest change in pressure at my fingertips, like a mouse testing a wall. "Come on," I whispered. I unhooked my battery pack from its magnetic clip, the lifeline of every spacewalker, still hot from work. On my command, it detached and floated like a square, metal heart. The frost on my glove convulsed. Spokes reached toward the pack, thin as eyelashes. For a second I saw it, a spider of crystal, no bigger than a hand, made of nothing but geometry and greed. "Come hungry," I said, and flung the pack through the open airlock toward Chapel 3's mouth. It was an elegant throw, if I'm honest. The pack spun exactly once, then twice, then drifted through the inner hatch and down the central corridor, its status lights winking like baitfish. The frost on my glove tore free and streamed after it in a glittering ribbon, a stream of winter smoke. Before it reached the pack, I sealed the hatch and hit decompress. The corridor of Chapel 3 became a windpipe in a giant cough. The pack, the ribbon, and whatever inside that ribbon had learned to ride a radio were flung end over end toward the far hatch. It all met the outer door with a soft, chastened thud. The ribbon splintered. Filaments became fragments. Fragments became nothing. Outside, the cloud of corpses rolled and turned their pale faces like flowers tracking the sun. One bumped the airlock frame and settled there, framed just beyond the viewport. A woman this time, her hair frozen in a shock around her face. A lace of frost had grown across her cheeks in filigree, more delicate than any human tattoo. Her eyes were closed. Then, like time reasserting itself, one eye opened a sliver. Not a human motion, too slow, too elastic, like a new idea deciding whether to be born. Don't, I told it. Told her. Told the thing living along her edges. I'm not your heater. Mothlight's fuel budget wasn't built for heroics, but I had one burst of main thruster to spare. I rotated us sunward, lining Chapel 3's spine with the bruised light of Neptune's distant morning, and fired. White exhaust roared invisibly. The barge's surface leapt from shade to sunlight, frost sublimated in a halo. The corpses flailed, then tumbled as their orbits shifted. The one at the airlock slid away, her single eye closing as gently as a coin dropped into water. I kept the thrust on longer than I should have. The battery meter nagged at the edge of my vision. The temperature alarms climbed into the yellow, then the red, then settled there like birds on a wire. I stopped when the calculations said that if I kept burning, I'd end up a satellite myself. Silence again. That old church hush. Behind it, the echo of 3 absent knocks. "Rook," my father's voice tried one more time, thin as one thread of silk. "Don't leave me." "I already did," I said, and killed the calm. I sat without gravity, without plan, and watched the barge spin with the slow majesty of something that has all the time in the world. In my visor's reflection, I noticed a smear on the inside of the glass, high up near my temple. A comet's tail, delicate. I brushed it with my glove. The smear divided into 6-sided islands, each one veined with that same 2 regular geometry, then stilled. For a long minute, I did not breathe. Then I scraped the smear into the little sample vial every spacer carries, because sometimes money comes in the form of right answers. I sealed it. I locked it in the highest radiation drawer I had. I fired Mothlight's engines once, twice, pushing Chapel 3's new orbit down toward the blue planet's atmosphere, toward a place where frozen things go to sink and forget themselves. The recorder chimed, waiting for my sign-off. My throat worked. "This is Salvage Specialist J. Rook aboard Mothlight," I said, and my voice sounded like a stranger wearing my mouth. "Chapel 3 deorbited. Anomaly encountered and mitigated. Recommend quarantine of debris zone and update to funeral barge engineering. Remove any conductive pathways between exterior hull and interior drawers. Consider non-electromagnetic placards. Consider silence." I cut the channel and drifted, letting Neptune bear its wide, patient shoulder beneath me. In the drawer, the vial was quiet. No knocks, no letters, no voice. If you looked away long enough, you could believe you had imagined the words, the way grief wakes you with the certainty someone has called your name. You could believe in physics only, in heat and cold and nothing braided between. I slept because you have to. When I woke, Mothlight's frost filters had caught a film of lace across the intake, a pattern delicate as breath on glass. It had arranged itself into mirror letters I could only read by leaning sideways to catch the right light. "Thank you," it said, and below that, 3 small, careful knocks bloomed and faded as the filters cycled. Then the letters softened into randomness again, into the kind of frost you can wipe away with the back of your hand and forget you ever saw. I thought about jettisoning the drawer, the vial, the whole corner of the ship where those 6-sided islands might have clung. I thought about the next salvager who'd reach for Chapel 3's bones and find nothing but empty heat. I thought about my father's voice carved into ice. Instead, I plotted a burn toward Ceres and wrote the report no one would read the first time. I made coffee and drank it slowly, watching the stars look exactly like they always do, indifferent and precise. If the universe wanted to teach us that even the quiet parts of us could be harvested and repeated, then maybe the lesson was to be louder in the right places and very, very quiet in the others. On the last day before the series approach, I checked the drawer. The vial lay in its foam like a pearl in a dark mouth. On its inner wall, a flower of frost had grown and faded. I didn't open it. I didn't say anything to it. As I strapped in for deceleration, 3 tiny knocks sounded in the hull. 1, 2, 3. No other sounds followed. That counted as a resolved ending, where the monster learned it could not keep my heat. But even resolved endings leave room for the echo of a voice you loved, braided into the cold architecture of the world, waiting for a warmer ship, a softer ear. I checked the heaters twice and turned my comm volume down to almost nothing. Then Mothlight lit her engine, and for a while the universe was nothing but fire and the kinds of silence you can choose. They told me it was derelict. The manifest called it Locust 3, a weather relay wedged in the shadow of a dead moon. The ping that reached the salvage board was weak and old, compressed packets bleeding through static at wide intervals like a heartbeat in its sleep. Unmanned. No special hazards, the dispatcher said, and slid the job to me because I took the cheap runs no one else wanted and didn't ask questions that stalled the pay. But when my skiff's floodlights swept across the station, I knew the manifest was a lie. Locust 3 wasn't a weather relay. It was a ring of black lattice and mirrored veins around a central spindle, more sculpture than structure, the way expensive secrets dress themselves to be boring. No markings. The docking collar wore overpainted scars where some previous name had been ground away. Grease and silence. I matched spin, kissed the collar, and hard-docked. The umbilical latched with a shudder I felt in my teeth. My breath fogged the inside of the helmet as I leaned close to the porthole. No lights beyond, no movement. The skiff's diagnostics fluttered in soft blues. My suit shows O2 at 98%, heart rate too high. "Hello?" I said into vacuum because habit is stronger than training. My voice came back 10 seconds later as a thin ghost in the comms, smeared by the time it took the skiff to bounce the call through its own systems. It sounded like me, but tired, older. I cycled the lock. The door crawled open, breathy and reluctant. Air washed past, cold and stale as an old attic. It carried a smell I could not place, ionized metal and something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long under a heat lamp. The corridor beyond was ribbed with conduits, Velcro handholds. Residual dust hung in the air like gold flecks, refusing to settle in the microgravity. I drifted hand over hand, flashlight beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. The beam carved shadows that moved like something alive when I moved, and I reminded myself that shadows are obedient, nothing to fear in a place with clean geometry and cast aluminum. A noise reached me, a soft tick. Then another, precisely 13 seconds apart. Not the ping of a rangefinder, not the click of a cooling coil. Something mechanical, purposeful, a metronome in the walls. I kept going. The first room I passed was a galley, perfectly squared, the edges a little too crisp like a render. A bowl floated near the ceiling with a single shriveled grape spinning slowly inside it. A strip of tape on the bulkhead read Vigil in block letters. My light found it and stuck. Vigil. The glue had been burned at the edges as if someone held a match to it and then changed their mind. I have a rule not to read other people's journals when working a derelict. The day you start browsing logs is the day you get sentimental and lose parts of yourself to other lives. But rules bend in the presence of curiosity. A tablet was magnetized to the table with a looping screen, attentional protocol active. Beneath that, lines of text scrolled and clipped. Shift change your to UTC. Eyes on, no mirrors, no sleeping on deck. The station creaked, a low whale song groan. Somewhere in the outer hull, something flexed. The tick came again. 12 seconds, 13, 13, 13. My tongue tasted of coins. When I reached central control, I found the first real sign that people had lived there. A mug strapped down with a zip tie, lips stained the orange of some powdered vitamins. A stack of poker chips tumbling in slow motion. A ring of chairs around a bank of dead monitors, each chair positioned with an eyeline toward the same corner of the room. And in that corner stood a camera on a gimbal, long dead, pointed down a narrow corridor that ended in a sealed hatch painted the same matte black as a weapon. Every salvage operator carries a slicer. I laid mine on the panel and asked the lock to tell me the truth. It chirped something in a language built from hashes and timestamps. The station had once answered to a different name entirely, Vigilance Array 3. My skin prickled under the suit. Unmanned, they'd said. No special hazards. Sure, I said to no one, and the no one answered, out of sync by 10 seconds. Sure, thinner and hollow as if it had traveled a long way. I swallowed and looked at the chairs again. There were 6. 5 had straps cut ragged, the way you cut straps in a hurry. The 6th was intact. A ball of worn cloth lay beneath it like a nest someone had abandoned fast. I wanted to leave. My back pressed itself toward the dock. Instead, I opened the hatch. Inside, the air hummed at the edge of hearing. The walls were lined with mirrored panels mounted on actuators, angled just slightly off parallel so that every surface reflected every other surface in a way that felt wrong, like standing between disagreement and seeing it go on forever. In the center of the room, suspended in a web of carbon filament, floated a black object the size of my head. It had too many faces and none. Every time I looked, the edges rearranged, like a polyhedron solving and unsolving itself. It didn't glow. It drank. The tick came from here. It wasn't a tick at all. It was the actuators on the mirrored panels making minuscule corrections in alignment every 13 seconds, keeping something within a narrow cone of observation, keeping it in a certain kind of gaze. I moved closer, and the hair on my arms stood up under the suit. The object drifted, or my perception of it drifted. Either way, it was slightly closer than before. Then the lights flickered. My flashlight sputtered and steadied. When it did, the object was closer again, by a distance too small to be anything but intentional. The width of the torn edge of that strap. The width of a breath. I do not scare easily. Space teaches a particular flavor of terror that is clean and distant. A numbers game, a calculus of vacuum and temperature. What I felt then was not numbers. It was being watched by something that did not have eyes and did not need them. A monitor on the far wall still carried power through some dedicated line. It showed a list of instructions under the heading Containment Rundown. Maintain full spectrum observation of node. Do not introduce additional mirrors. If observation ceases for greater than 0.4 seconds, execute failsafe purge. If failsafe purge fails, do not approach. Close hatch, abandon station. Below that, in smaller letters, more human. It learns your attention. And under that, in a handwriting that tightened the longer it went, we are feeding it ourselves. My throat clicked when I swallowed. The tick counted 13 seconds of my indecision. I stepped back. The room seemed to stretch, the reflections doubling and tripling my movement into a stuttered dance. In one of the mirror angles, I saw my helmeted head turn a half second before I turned it. The object in the center rotated, revealing a face that was not a face, a plane of black that suggested depth where depth had no business being. I looked away for a fraction of a second to check the time on my suit HUD, and in that fraction, the world shifted. The object was near enough to kiss the visor. I shoved off the wall, slammed into the hatch frame, fumbled myself out into the corridor. The hatch sealed on its own a moment later with a soft kiss of magnets. Above it, a red light pulsed once and died. The tick persisted, patient. Back in Central, I strapped into one of the chairs and turned on the monitors. Power bled from grid to grid as the station woke reluctantly. Cameras blinked to life one by one until 23 of them fed me angles of the chamber from every corner. The object sat dead center in every frame, closer in a few, farther in others, like the world disagreed with itself. The system overlay drew little green boxes around it in each feed and stamped the word node beneath every box as if naming it made it less of a bruise in the air. I picked through logs. The last entry was 3 months old. It belonged to someone named P. Rojas. It read, slept. I'm sorry, woke to motion alert. We're at 0.3 seconds, but I think it's more clever now. It knows the cameras. It knows when you blink. Don't blink. The entry before that from someone else simply read, singing under the door again. Sounds like my brother. There is no brother. Tell the replacement there is no brother. The sweet smell was stronger. I knew it now. Overheated plastic. Something on the edge of failing itself into smoke. Okay, I whispered. Okay. The comm threw the word back at me late and thin. I shut the comm off. The station felt better without my own ghost in it. The plan was simple and bad. I would keep the cameras up for as long as I could while I figured out how to remote the containment unit into the skiff's cargo bay. Then I'd trap the node and throw the entire mess into the gravity well of the moon below. The station's protocols were built around observation. If it needed to be watched, I would give it eyes on the way down. Skiff cams, helm cams, a jury-rigged stream of attention made of plastic lenses and stubbornness, all pointed at the coffin until the heat of descent melted them into blindness. And if it got free before that, well, I'd make sure it had me and me alone to learn. I had just pulled the first power distribution panel when a new sound threaded the tick, a soft, wet laugh, the laugh of a mouth that learned its shape moments ago. "You don't have to do this alone," it said. The voice was mine. Not like the 10-second echo, this one came in sync from the room itself, vibrating the air against my suit, speaking through the station's bones. It hurt to hear. "I'm not," I said before I could stop myself. "I have cameras." "The cameras blink," my voice said back, careful, patient, more certain than I felt. "They blink when the coolant surges. They blink when your attention divides to pain, to hunger, to old memories. Think about your father. He smelled like cigarettes in winter. His jacket had a tear under the left armpit, and once you put your hand there to feel where he ended and you began." I froze, hand inside a bundle of cables, skin electric and raw. My father had smelled like winter. Everyone's father smells like something, I told myself. It's a trick. It's a library of human guesswork. Say cigarettes and winter often enough, and you'll hit the mark by accident. But my hand still wanted to curl into that memory, and the act of not curling was a tension I could not spare. "Don't," I said. "Don't do that. Don't do that," the station mocked, and then gently, as if apologizing. "You came when we asked. You want to help. There is a chair. Sit. Watch. It needs watching. Eyes make it slow. We fed it eyes, and it learned to eat slow. That is good, yes?" The room listing gently in my vision told me my blood pressure was doing fun things. I stapled my thoughts to practical steps. Power distribution. Prioritize cameras and environmental stabilization. Bridge the melted coolant line using the spare polymer. Lock the hatch from the outside. Find the remotes for the mirror actuators. Keep it inside the cone of view. Keep the cone tight. As I worked, the station kept talking. The voice bled through ventilation ducts, through the floor. Always my timbre, but never my intent. "Shift change 02, eyes on, no mirrors, no sleeping on deck," it murmured, repeating the log list like a prayer. He sang through the door. "They said not to open it. You will open it anyway because it knows your name. You will." "No," I said. "I won't." I tightened the clamp and wrenched a valve with all the leverage the chair would allow. Cold air hissed in response, blowing dust off a control surface. On the monitor, the node drifted and stilled in minor defiance, as if water slammed against a shore too patient to be impressed. I switched the cameras into redundancy mode, 3 eyes per angle. The stream drew power like a starving thing. The station's reactor hummed louder, a heartbeat I could almost map my own to if I didn't mind going mad. On the far right monitor, a motion alert flared and went dead. Another came and died. "Don't make me talk to you," I said finally when the voice began to recite my childhood address. "Just be quiet." It was quiet for 13 seconds. Then the tick went away. I did not realize I had built my courage around that metronome until nothing marked my time but my breath and the thin edge of my own fear. In the silence, my mind filled the gap with the kind of noises that change when you look for the source. A footfall behind me that turned out to be my own heart. A sighing that turned out to be a leak. A hand on my shoulder that turned out to be the memory of a hand on my shoulder. The lights dimmed. The camera's green boxes flickered and held. The node in the center of the room was closer by the width of a thought. It was as if the station were blinking. "Fail-safe purge," I whispered, and the menu scrolled obediently under my finger. "Arm purge. Confirm." My thumb hovered. I had one shot. I triggered the purge. Somewhere deep, a hatch unlatched with the finality of a judge's gavel. The mirrored panels snapped to new angles. Tailored vents opened and exhaled the room's air into vacuum with a ferocity that made the station tremble. My monitors whitened with ice crystals, then cleared. The node hung in deeper stillness, like a spider frozen in resin. For a heartbeat, I believed. Then the gimbal on camera B twitched. Not an actuator move, a flinch. The green box slipped and reacquired a fraction of a degree off. A sliver of the node escaped the cone. In the slice of attention left unlit, something moved too fast to see. When the image stabilized again, nothing hung where it should. The black polyhedron was gone from the center of the room. The chairs around me creaked as if something took a seat that wasn't there. "We told you," my voice said from right next to my ear. "Don't blink." I turned toward the sound and saw my helmet reflected in the dead monitor. My faceplate held a pale oval like a second moon. Behind that moon, something darker than black gave the mirror a scar. It did not have a shape, not in any geometry I knew. It was not in the room. It was in the representation of the room. It had learned the cameras. Now it learned the mirrors. Now it learned me. I did not have time to be careful. I did the kind of thing you do when your body wants to become a scream. I grabbed the spare lens kit from the control rack, popped the case, and duct-taped a fisheye to the barrel of my suit cam, so that wherever I looked, the camera would look more, would look wider, would keep seeing when my pupils constricted and my lids came down. I swung the monitors to face me and dragged the chair into the tightest triangle of their gaze. I made myself into a convergence of attention, a human lighthouse. "Come on," I said. "Come on, then." When it came, it did not make a sound. The room changed uglier by degrees, corners lengthening by a hair, seams misaligning, my breath fogging for too long before it forgot to be breath and became thought again. In the monitor farthest left, a smear of matte slid across the floor like oil dragged by a magnet under glass. I kept my eyes on it until they watered. It stalled under that attention like ice under salt. It learned that, too. It found the edges of the monitors where the brightness fell off, and it worried at those edges, burrowing its knot shape into the places where certainty thins. I chased it with my gaze from feed to feed, feeling like a child stomping on cockroaches. It learned the rhythm of my pivot. It spoke with my mouth to tell me it was tired. It spoke with my father's mouth to tell me he forgave me for leaving. It spoke with a voice I didn't recognize, and I knew, with a vertigo that felt like grief, that this was one of the names cut from the chairs. There is a point in every fight where the thing you fear becomes the thing you despise because it has revealed its trick. The trick is always the same. Take your attention, add a mirror, make you watch yourself watch until you're hollowed out by feedback. Attention is nutrient. Attention is leash. "Fine," I said to the thing, to the station, to the version of me who would one day call me a fool. I triggered the cargo clamps remotely and felt the thunk of the skiff's bay doors unlocking through the soles of my boots. I opened every shutter on the station's observatory array. I told the cameras to lock on my suit beacon, and I stood up out of the chair. "Eyes on," I said, and I backed toward the containment hatch. The purge had reset the locks. The hatch slid open when I told it to in a voice as calm as I could make it. The chamber beyond was still as a stopped heart. Ice glittered in a perfect sphere where breath had been. The mirror actuators pointed at angles dictated by math that wanted to be a prayer. In the center, a vacancy shaped like the idea of something. I stepped inside. The door sealed behind me with a closeness you feel in your blood. My helmet cam displayed its fisheye view in a corner of my vision. The monitors outside showed me as a tiny astronaut in an inside-out cathedral made of reflections. Each mirror returned me to myself, smaller, multiplied, stitched by light into a net. I was now somewhere between bait and warden. The node's absence in the center was so loud it had a flavor. "Come on," I said again, the way you talk to a feral animal you can't afford to pity. "Come on. I'll watch you all the way down." Something brushed the back of my helmet. Not pressure, an absence of pressure, a vacuum in the shape of a hand. The fisheye caught it indirectly, a sliver of darker than dark where my head occluded the camera's periphery. The mirrors sang in small metallic complaints as their actuators shifted to maintain lines of sight. I walked, slow and sure, to the far wall where a leap to the maintenance ladder would put me over the emergency eject lever. "Don't," it said with my voice from inside my mouth, because it had learned the acoustics of my throat as it learned everything else. "You are so tired. Sit. We can keep this together. We can keep the watching going a little longer. That is what you came for." Maybe it was right. Maybe there was no universe where I could finish the journey without blinking. We are built to blink. We are built to sleep. We are built to remember the smell of winter and soft food in hard times. I reached the lever and set my glove against its grip. The cameras locked on my visor flare, the mirrors kissed new angles. Eyes on, I said one last time to the station, to whatever might replace me, to the idea that I could be larger than my own fear. I pulled. The floor fell away with the sick grace of vacuum. The chamber blew free like a seed head torn from its stalk. The world inverted. The tethered cables went taut and screamed like violin strings, then snapped. The suddenness flattened my breath to a wheeze. Through the hatch's tiny porthole, I watched the station shrink, its lattice of mirrors blooming toward me, and then recoiling like a sea anemone. The skiff's cargo bay yawned open on command, a bright square with its own cluster of cameras wincing against the sparks of torn connections. The node, if that name mattered, was in every reflection and none. The chamber spun. The fisheye showed me the world turning into a slow carousel of my own image. I clamped boots to the deck, threw a steel line, and felt the tug of the skiff's guidance thrusters trying to coax the chamber home. It was like towing a storm. At some point, the tick returned. I realized it was not the station's metronome at all, not anymore. It was me, counting breaths to stay awake, 13 seconds between. We hit the cargo bay with a violence that rattled my teeth. The clamps bit, the bay door shuddered. Cameras bloomed to life along the arc of the ceiling, blinking green in sequence. For a heartbeat, I believed again. I'd made a room with enough eyes to starve it. Something moved in the reflection of my reflection. The green lights went dark. One by one, not like a cascade failure, but like a decision. It had learned the cameras themselves. "We did our best," my father's voice said gently. "We did our best." I wanted to cry. Instead, I disconnected the chamber's remaining power feeds manually and took the emergency pack off the wall with hands that vibrated like plucked strings. In that pack was something I'd never used in 12 years of salvage work. A flare. A chemical tube, no electronics, pure exotherm, hissing white light when cracked. I popped the seal with my teeth, and the flare screamed daylight into the chamber so violently that every mirror threw a sun into my face. In that naked light, the knot shape had shape after all. No geometry the station's software could name, but something my animal brain decided was a body. It recoiled from the flare. Not a retreat, the way a shadow tightens under noon. I held the flare in both hands like a sword and pressed it into the space where the node gathered, and it burned, and it did not burn. It had no substance to char, only behaviors to erase. "Watch me," I told it, "watch me watching you." The heat licked the suit. Alarms whined inside my helmet, adding their panic to mine. I moved, slow and determined, driving the light like a wedge. The mirrors stuttered as the actuators failed under the flare's heat and my sabotage's earlier sins. The cameras, blind and learning at nothing, winked back on uselessly to show me as a smear of white flame. Somewhere the skiff complained about thermal thresholds like a child with a fever. I pushed the flare into the center of its presence and felt, not resistance, but attention. A dark attention that tasted like old sugar. My head filled with a cold lake, and under the surface something that might have been a voice, that might have been mine, said, "We are the same shape turned inside out. If you stop looking, you become me. If you keep looking, you become me in time." "Fine," I said through my teeth. "Then watch this." I tossed the flare into the open equipment rack where the chamber's volatile oxygen scrubber bricks waited for their next maintenance. Fire is a story that loves to be told again. The flare found that story with the joy of recognition, white slammed to white. The blaze ate the air greedily, and as it ate, the knot shape thinned like fog in a desert. The mirrors screamed themselves out of alignment. The cameras burst one by one in popping flowers of glass. I pulled the manual release on the cargo bay again to starve the fire and give space nothing to love. The door groaned, gave, then stuck halfway, heat warped. A hand, my hand, another hand, ran along my visor from the inside like a lover's last gesture. Then there was nothing there but my breath and the taste of ozone. When the bay door finally pried itself open, the fire coughed and died into vacuum. The chamber, blackened and ugly, was a throat with a charred uvula. I was shaking. I realized I had not blinked in a very long time. In the quiet after, the tick did not return. The station, now a distant lattice in the port view, drifted as if relieved. I stood with the dead cameras and cracked mirrors and watched the carbon filaments that had held the node float without purpose. The sweet smell had burned away to nothing. I stayed that way a long time, attention spilled on emptiness, until the ache behind my eyes subsided and I could trust my body again. Then I sealed the bay, jettisoned the ruined chamber toward the dead moon, and set the skiff's nose toward the dark between stars. I sent my report in tight beam, compressed and dull as a grocery list. Locus 3, classified asset, failsafe purge triggered, containment compromised, chamber destroyed, no survivors. It felt less like a lie than the manifest I'd been given. I slept for 20 hours. I dreamed of mirrors aligned like teeth. When I woke, I floated to the porthole, pressed my forehead to the glass, and watched the stars burn holes in the night. My eyes watered in the cold. I blinked once, on purpose, a choice. From the speaker above the pilot's chair, a sound came on softly, like someone remembering how to clear their throat. Tick. 13 seconds later, another. I smiled without humor and reached for the flare locker to make sure it was still empty. It was. "Eyes on," I said to the dark that wanted to be listened to. My own voice came back from the speaker exactly in sync, not an echo, not a mockery, just a reminder. Eyes on.